In our headlines on this Tuesday, November 25th, here in South Korea. During their talks in Türkiye on Monday, President Lee Jae-myung and his Turkish host Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreed to advance cooperation in defense, energy, and more. Meanwhile, the consumer sentiment here in the country hits an 8-year high in November, driven by the trade deal between Seoul and Washington and better than expected third quarter growth. Also, on the local front, South Korea's Nuri space rocket has been positioned onto its launch pad in Gyeonggi County ahead of its scheduled liftoff in the wee hours of this coming Thursday. South Korea and Turkey have agreed to advance bilateral efforts in critical industries ranging from defense to energy. Intentions to this end were shared during summit talks in the Turkish capital on Monday. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The South Korean leader was officially welcomed by his Turkish counterpart on Monday at the presidential palace in Ankara. An amicable mood and friendship were prominent.
튀르키예의 한국 전쟁 참전 75주년이자 저의 대통령 취임 첫 해인 올해 피를 나눈 형제의 나라 튀르키예를 방문하게 돼서 매우 뜻깊게 생각합니다.
I believe your state visit this time consolidated the strong bond and solidarity between Türkiye and South Korea.
President Lee Jae-myung is the first South Korean leader in 13 years to travel to Türkiye for a state visit. His talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan lasted for nearly 2 hours and yielded deliverables to bolster strategic partnership, including in the defense industry.
양국이 방산 강국 도약을 위해서 노력하는 과정에서 상호 신뢰를 바탕으로 공동 생산, 기술 협력, 훈련, 교류 등에 있어 협력을 지속해 나가기로 약속했습니다.
We have worked on many key joint projects with Korea when it comes to the arms industry, such as the Altay main battle tank project. We hope to diversify cooperation.
Also discussed was nuclear energy cooperation to support Korea's bid for a new nuclear power plant project in Türkiye, with the evaluation process in the works. In line with that, an MOU was signed. The two leaders also discussed cooperation in biohealth, noting Korean firm SK Plasma taking part in a blood product project in Türkiye. Other areas of focus were cooperation on infrastructure, AI, and culture, as well as the resumption of a joint economic committee between the two countries. Also addressed war regional security.
우리의 대북 정책에 대한 에르도안 대통령님과 튀르키예 정부의 일관된 지지에 각별히 감사 말씀을 드립니다.
He also vowed to bolster Korea's humanitarian assistance to help resolve issues regarding Syrian refugees in Türkiye.
I welcome South Korea's establishment of its diplomatic ties with Syria in April. I believe we can cooperate regarding various regions, including Syria, Gaza, and the rebuilding of Ukraine.
President Lee's two-day state visit to Türkiye began with him paying tribute to the founder of Türkiye, the late Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, earlier in the day. President Lee is set to return home, wrapping up his first trip to the Middle East and Africa that lasted for 10 days, aimed at expanding South Korea's diplomatic horizon. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Ankara.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll be in Beijing next April to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Our Lee Soon-jae has details.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced that he has accepted an invitation from Chinese President Xi Jinping to visit Beijing in April. The White House confirmed that the offer was made during a telephone call between the two leaders on Monday morning, where they discussed a wide range of bilateral issues and ongoing geopolitical challenges. Among the topics were China's subdued purchases of American soybeans, the war in Ukraine, and rising tensions over Taiwan. The latest call comes several weeks after the two leaders held a summit in South Korea. In a social media post following Monday's call, President Trump described the conversation as productive, saying the two leaders addressed China's exports of chemicals used in fentanyl production, progress on farm imports, and cooperation on the war in Ukraine. He said both sides had made meaningful progress since their summit in South Korea, and added now was the time to set sights on the big picture. The Chinese government also released its account of the call. State media reported that President Xi urged both nations to preserve what he described as the positive momentum achieved in South Korea. Beijing emphasized that the Ukraine conflict remains a priority and said that China is seeking further communication with Washington on international security concerns. The Chinese readout also contained stronger language on Taiwan. According to Beijing, President Xi stressed that China views Taiwan's return as an essential component of the post-war international order and reiterated that Beijing expects Washington to respect what it describes as China's core interests. President Trump has previously said that Taiwan was not discussed during the South Korea summit, but White House officials have yet to clarify whether it was raised during Monday's call. Meanwhile, as part of that diplomatic push, President Trump also confirmed that he has invited President Xi for a formal state visit to the United States. Both visits are expected to frame the next phase in the effort to restore more predictable relations between the world's two largest economies. Lee Soon-jae, Arirang News.
And Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi spoke to U.S. President Donald Trump on the phone on Tuesday, just hours after the latter held talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. The call came at President Trump's request, and the two leaders reportedly addressed a wide range of mutual interests, including their alliance and the challenges within the Indo-Pacific region. According to the Japanese Prime Minister, Mr. Trump also touched upon the current state of U.S.-China relations. Xi, however, did not reveal whether or not Tokyo's ongoing diplomatic feud with Beijing was discussed. Up next, discussions continue over details of the peace framework to end Russian aggression against Ukraine. Our Pyongyang has the latest.
U.S. and Ukrainian officials have reworked a peace proposal following talks in Geneva on ending the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Monday the updated plan now includes correct elements and that the list of steps to end the war has become more workable. But he stressed that the most sensitive issues, including long-term security guarantees, will be handled directly with Washington.
As of now, after Geneva, there are fewer points, no longer 28, and many proper elements have been incorporated into this framework. There is still a lot for all of us to work on together. It's very difficult to finalize the document, and we must do everything properly.
The revisions follow pushback from European allies, who drew up their own counter-proposal after rejecting elements seen as favoring Russia. Those amendments were quickly dismissed by Moscow as completely unconstructive. At the White House, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt emphasized that Washington is engaging both sides equally and that most points in the U.S. draft have already been agreed upon in Kiev.
Everybody inside feels optimistic about what happened and transpired yesterday in Geneva. Secretary Rubio, Special Envoy Witkoff, the whole team really worked through the points of that 28-point peace plan that the United States authored with input from both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Meanwhile, negotiations are taking place against a tense backdrop. A massive drone strike on Kharkiv killed 4 people over the weekend, while a Ukrainian drone attack near Moscow knocked out power for thousands. European leaders say more work is needed and that they will meet again this week to coordinate their position. Kiev and Washington expect further revisions in the coming days as they push toward a just and lasting peace. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
On the local front, consumer sentiment has hit its highest in 8 years, driven by the finalized trade deal between Seoul and Washington and stronger than expected third-quarter growth. Our Kim Bo-kyung walks us through the most recent findings.
South Korea's consumer sentiment rose to an 8-year high in November, boosted by the end to Korea-U.S. tariff negotiations and stronger than expected third-quarter GDP growth. According to a survey by the Bank of Korea, The Composite Consumer Sentiment Index climbed to 112.4 this month, up 2.6 points from the previous month. The index had fallen for 2 straight months in September and October, but turned upward for the first time in 3 months, reaching its highest level in 8 years since November 2017. The index reflects consumers' overall perception of economic conditions based on 6 key factors, including expected household income, future living conditions, and future economic outlook. A reading above 100 indicates optimism, while below 100 signals pessimism. Among 6 sub-indices, the outlook for future economic conditions posted the biggest increase, rising 8 points from the previous month. The assessment of current economic conditions climbed 5 points, while expectations for future household income and future living conditions rose 2 and 1 points respectively. Regarding the index, an official from the Bank of Korea said the increase was mainly due to the tariff agreement with the U.S. and the third quarter gross domestic product growth exceeding expectations. In the July-September period, real gross domestic product, a key gauge of economic growth, rose 1.2% from the previous quarter. The official added that the index fell sharply after the martial law situation, and as uncertainties such as U.S. tariffs were gradually resolved, it rose significantly due to a base effect. Meanwhile, the house price outlook index was at 119, falling by 3 points compared to October. Though it turned to a downtrend, it still remains higher than that in July, which was at 109 after the June 27th real estate measures. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund says the South Korean economy stepped onto a stage of recovery in the second half of this year and is slated to see substantial improvement next year. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers the assessment and the outlook.
The International Monetary Fund forecasts a U-shaped recovery for the South Korean economy over the next 2 years. According to the 2025 Article 4 consultation report released on Monday, the IMF expects Korea to face moderate growth before momentum builds again, with this year's growth forecast at 0.9%. The IMF cited a gradual recovery in private consumption. For 2026, the outlook gets even better to 1.8%. This, as the effects of accommodative policies take hold and external uncertainties are expected to ease. Inflation is also looking to stabilize. It's expected to drop to the 2% range from this year to next year and further to 1.8% by the end of 2026. A key point of attention in the report is the nation's fiscal health. The IMF projects that South Korea's government debt-to-GDP ratio will rise from the current 40% range to surpass the 50% mark in 2026. Despite this breach of the 50% threshold, the fund assesses the debt level as sustainable. Given the lingering downside risks, such as deepening geopolitical fragmentation and potential slowdowns in AI demand, the IMF advises that maintaining the current loose monetary and fiscal stance is appropriate to support the economy. The report also highlighted structural vulnerabilities in Korea's trade model. With 70% of exports concentrated in electronics and autos, and over half destined for the US, China, or ASEAN, the IMF urges diversification. The recommendation is a strategic shift toward high-value services and the cultural sector. The fund specifically validated the government's push to monetize soft power. It said the authorities' plans to provide more targeted support to innovative business models and ensure sustainable revenue generation from cultural services, including through intellectual property licensing, are welcome. The report concludes that fostering these innovative sectors is essential for Korea to maintain its competitive edge and achieve its potential growth targets. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's Nuri space rocket is poised for liftoff in the wee hours of this coming Thursday. That being said, my colleague Park Konu joins me from the launch site with the latest. Konu, welcome. First things first then, Konu, what's the weather like there?
Thanks for having me, Sunny. I'm here at the NATO Space Center in Gongwon County in Jeollanam Province, the country's southwest, where many of Korea's rocket launching projects have been carried out even before the Nuri project. And as you mentioned, the rain has cleared, but strong winds continue to sweep across this area. And due to strong wind, my hands are freezing, the computer screen and my microphone is also shaking as well. So the strong wind advisory is currently taking place.
Right, Konu, thank you so much for braving the cold weather to bring us this report then. Are preparations, Konu, on track then?
Right, so at the moment, most procedures have been completed and everything is running pretty smoothly, I can say, despite the weather. And before 2 p.m. Korea time, the Nuri rocket was erected and secured in place so that it remains stable even under strong winds. That comes after a delay of about an hour and a half earlier this morning due to unexpected rain and also strong wind as well. The rocket was transported to the launch pad by transporting an unmanned special purpose vehicle to minimize any shock which could pose risk to the launch mission. The transporter moves at a speed of about 1.5 kilometers per hour, roughly the walking pace of a person. And later today, the rocket will be connected to the umbilical system, which supplies fuel and oxidizer ahead of launch. Engineers will also conduct further checks to ensure there are no blockages or leakage points in the system. However, it's worth pointing out that this process could be postponed to tomorrow morning due to weather conditions, but officials say that there's no need to worry as there's still sufficient time before the scheduled launch on Thursday.
Right then. Along with those words of reassurance, Konu, what are the remaining protocols ahead of the actual launch?
Right, so on the day before launch, there's a comprehensive inspection focusing mainly on the fueling system and electro components. The actual loading of fuel and oxidizer will begin 4 hours prior to liftoff. And as of now, the estimated launch window is between 12:54 and 1:14 a.m. on Thursday, and the exact launch time will be finalized tomorrow evening at around 8 p.m. tomorrow after the Launch Management Committee reviews weather conditions, the possibility of collision with space objects, and the overall readiness of the rocket.
I see. And Konu, while the excitement continues to mount, what are some aspects of this latest launch to keep an eye on, would you say?
So for this time, the Nuri rocket, this will be the first nighttime launch ever, offering the best conditions to observe light, natural light displays, or what we call auroras. And the rocket will also carry a total of 13 satellites, which is up from the 7 carried in the previous launch 2.5 years ago. And as the manufacturing of this fourth vehicle was led entirely by the private company Hanwha Aerospace, this can mark a major milestone in the transfer of technology and a shift toward a private sector-driven launch system. And back to you, Sunny.
All right, Konu, thank you for that coverage. And again, thank you for braving the cold weather. Do keep us posted. Meanwhile, on the stage this November is a performance to celebrate 60 years of diplomatic relations between Korea and Japan, and a black comedy that seeks to better engage the audience. Our Ian Jin has this tale of 2 plays.
Yakiniku Dragon, set in the 1970s in Japan's Kansai region, presents the story of a Korean family running a grilling restaurant. It is written and directed by Jung Hee-shin, a third-generation Korean born in Japan, bringing a piece of realist theater based on his own life and experiences of the time.
I'm fond of all the characters, but especially the father. Many of his lines come directly from things my own father used to say.
Chung drew significant attention in 2023 for adapting director Bong Joon-ho's film Parasite into a stage play. And this time he brings a spirited perspective to the discrimination experienced by immigrants.
Korea-Japan relations have changed, and Japanese people have become more interested in Korea. But issues such as the presence and identity of Koreans in Japan have remained largely unseen.
Recognized for its artistic merit in both countries, Yakiniku Dragon features actors such as Ko Soo-hee, an original cast member, and others from both Korea and Japan whose performances transcend language barriers. Also on display this November is Trap, adapted and directed by Ha Soo-min from a short story by Swiss playwright Friedrich Dürrenmatt. The play follows a protagonist who, after a car accident, ends up staying in a rural village and becomes involved in a mock trial held in a retired judge's home, leading to a series of unexpected events. It is a black comedy that exposes the uncomfortable truths beneath the laughter, and the production has welcomed actor Park Gon-young to the cast. Rather than facing the stage straight on, the theater's seats are arranged on 3 sides surrounding the stage, allowing audiences to observe the actors' psychological shifts up close and having the effect of experiencing the play as jurors themselves. Trap is at the Sejong Center for the Performing Arts until November 30th. 이은진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, veteran actor Lee Soon-jae passed away at the age of 91 in the wee hours of this Tuesday morning. He ventured into acting while studying philosophy at the prestigious Seoul National University and went on to build a career spanning over 7 decades across big and small screens as well as on stage. Even in his later years, he maintained a strict health routine and continued to take on acting roles. He was celebrated as Korea's oldest active performer.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In the U.S., a federal judge delivered a major setback to the Trump administration on Monday, throwing out the criminal indictments against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Judge Cameron McGowan Curry found that former President Donald Trump's installation of Lindsay Halligan as interim U.S. Attorney in Virginia was invalid and said that all actions taken under that appointment, including both indictments, were unlawful exercises of executive power. The cases were dismissed without prejudice, meaning they could be refiled, though the judge noted the statute of limitations for the charges against Comey may have expired. The White House said it will appeal the dismissal, adding that the president has full confidence in Halligan. Comey was charged with making false statements and obstructing Congress during his 2020 testimony about FBI leaks. James was indicted for bank fraud and making false statements to a bank. Both deny wrongdoing and accuse the Trump administration of political retaliation. In Pakistan on Monday, 3 suicide attackers targeted the Federal Constabulary headquarters in Peshawar, killing 3 security personnel and wounding 11 according to local officials. One bomber was killed after detonating a bomb at the facility's gate, while 2 others were shot dead before entering the premises. Authorities said more than 400 personnel were inside for a parade, and senior officers were expected to be present. Jamaat al-Ahrar, a splinter group of the Pakistan Taliban, claimed responsibility for the attack. Pakistan's president and prime minister issued statements condemning the attack, which comes amid a spike in violence across the region. On Wall Street, tech giants powered a market rebound on Monday local time as U.S. policymakers raised expectations of a rate cut in December. The Nasdaq rose 2.7%, its strongest gain since May, while the S&P 500 advanced more than 1.5%. Alphabet jumped over 5%, surpassing $300 for the first time. Tesla surged roughly 7% on a bullish analyst call and progress on its in-house AI chips, while Nvidia added about 2% as traders monitored a decision over the potential export of the company's H200 AI chip to China. U.S. Fed Governor Christopher Waller joined New York Fed President John Williams, a close ally of Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, in reinforcing expectations for a December rate cut due to labor market weakness. In New York on Monday, organizers unveiled the new Times Square New Year's Eve ball, the 9th design since 1907 and first new design in 9 years. The sphere features 5,280 Waterford crystals, nearly double that of the previous version, and made its debut during a ceremony marking its first ascent atop One Times Square. The old ball will be displayed in a new Times travel exhibit opening in 2026. Ji Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
A heavy snow advisory was issued around the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, and it has rained sporadically in other areas. As the concentration of ultrafine dust in most regions is at bad levels, rain has been mixed with yellow dust around the country. From tonight on, cold air will move in and temperatures will get much colder. The Nuri lunch is scheduled for Thursday in Gohung in Jeollanam-do province. No major weather disruption is expected for lunchtime, which is set for around 1 a.m. Temperatures will move up to double digits to around 14 degrees during the day, both tomorrow and Thursday. Tomorrow's morning temperature in Seoul, Chuncheon, and Gyeongju will plunge to 2 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at 3 degrees. Highs will be similar to today's at 12 degrees in Daejeon and Gwangju, 14 degrees in Jeju. Cold below zero is forecast in the second half of this week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.